In 1979, along with Tookie's arrest, was the start of the A-Tray Rollin 60s war.
Shoots me in the stomach, point blank range, no closer than you and I are, and blows me against the wall. And the impact of the bullet.
A lot of people don't know this, but Snoop Dogg wasn't actually the first well-known Big Snoop Dogg. That title originally belonged to a feared Rollin 60s Crip OG named Fred Hill, aka Big Snoop Dogg, and he had a deadly reputation. Even Monster Kody, another feared figure in the streets, almost lost his life in an encounter with him.
Towards him, try to grab the gun, and he shoots me in the left hand, and my hand hits the wall like it's blown off, where I don't look at my hand. So now I know it's time to go. I turn around and try to run, and he shoots me in the back. The bullet that hits me in the back knocks me down on my face.
Let's get into it. Fred Hill, born around 1958, grew up in the heart of Los Angeles during a time when the streets were just beginning to change, and not for the better. As a kid, he picked up the nickname Snoopy, a playful name at first, but one that would eventually evolve into something much more serious, Big Snoop Dogg, while Snoop from Long Beach would later adopt the same name independently and bring it into the mainstream. Fred Hill had already been carrying it through the alleys and blocks of West LA. On the streets, when someone said Snoop, they were talking about him. Early on, Fred lived on the east side of LA, but around 1967, when he was still just a boy, his family made the move to the west side. They settled on 6th Avenue in the Hyde Park area, territory that in just a few years would become known as the home base of the Rollin 60s Crips. At the time, it was just another working-class black neighborhood, but the streets were changing fast, and a new generation of youth was beginning to carve out their own identities in the form of gang sets and street crews. By his late teens, Hill was already deep into the Crip lifestyle. Around 1975, when he was about 17, he got involved with a new Crip set that was forming right there in his neighborhood. That set would go on to become the infamous Rollin 60s Neighborhood Crips. And Fred Hill wasn't just another member, he was part of the first wave, one of the earliest soldiers in what would become one of the most powerful Crip sets in Los Angeles. In fact, some stories even say that Fred Hill was the one who came up with the name Rollin 60s himself. Whether or not he coined it, there's no doubt that he helped shape what the Rollin 60s would become. As one of the original members, Hill earned the status of an OOG, that's triple OG, a title reserved for the real deal pioneers of a gang set. The Rollin 60s officially took shape around 1976, breaking off from the West Side Crips. It was a volatile time in LA. Gang culture was exploding, and tensions were rising in every corner of the city. Fred Hill, with his fearless attitude and natural leadership, quickly rose through the ranks. Other OGs remember him as being in the mix from the start, already building a reputation as someone you didn't want to cross. By the late 70s, Fred Hill had solidified himself as a serious figure on the streets of South Central. He had a reputation for being aggressive, hands-on, and always ready to ride for his set. His name rang bells. He wasn't the kind of guy to sit in the background or let others do the dirty work. Hill was out on the front lines, establishing turf, handling business, and letting it be known that the Rollin 60s weren't to be messed with. By 1980, Hill was considered one of the deadliest shooters in the Rollin 60s. He was often mentioned alongside other feared names like Petty Whack, Keda Rock, and Mumbles. These were the guys you called when things got serious, when it was time to handle rivals, enforce respect, or settle long-standing beefs. By the late 1970s, Fred Hill, at only 20 years old, had built a name that carried weight all across South Central, and he was deeply embedded in one of the deadliest gang rivalries LA had ever seen. The war between the Rollin 60s Neighborhood Crips and their bitter enemies, the 8-Tray Gangster Crips. This was no small beef. It was a war that would define the streets for years to come. The tension started in 1979 over something as seemingly simple as a fight over a girl. An 8-Tray recruit got into it with a Rollin 60s member, and what should have ended in fists turned into bullets. The 8-Tray kid ended up shooting and killing Tyrone, who just so happened to be the younger brother of Big Rick, a respected OG in the 60s. That one act lit a fuse that would explode into an all-out war.
In 1979, along with Tookie's arrest, was the start of the 8-Tray Rollin 60s war. So I understand the whole thing was over a girl.
Yes, sir.
After that, the city changed. Neighborhoods that once had peace or shared respect were suddenly drawing lines in the sand. Homies turned into enemies overnight, And at the center of it all was Fred Hill. With his cold presence and reputation as a top-tier enforcer, Hill quickly became what gang culture calls a ghetto star. That's someone whose name echoed in every alley, whose face was known to both allies and enemies, and whose actions shaped the street politics of the time. Sanyika Shakur, better known as Monster Kody, himself one of the most feared 8 Trey members, mentioned Hill by name in his memoir. He recalled that when his crew hit the streets looking for top Rollin 60s targets in 1980, Fred Studies Solus Snoop Hill was on that hit list alongside other feared names like Petty Whack, Kaitarok, Mumbles, and the war between the Rollin 60s and the 8 Treys was nothing short of brutal. The violence became so savage that entire families were destroyed. One woman, Alyssa Burks McKnight, tragically lost several nephews to the conflict. In one of the darkest tales from that era, she claimed that Monster Kody himself captured one of her teenage nephews, dismembered him, and kept the boy's arms as twisted trophies.
Monster Kody did an interview, and he said that he brought somebody's arm.
You mean to tell me that story is real?
Yes, that was Jay Blake's arm. It was real. He did bring an arm back. They chopped him up and put him in front of Jefferson High School.
Hill's reputation during this era was built on fearlessness and precision. He was hard as nails, as many described him, focused, cold, and never without a firearm. His crew reportedly had access to stolen military-grade weapons, making them one of the most heavily armed Crip sets on the West Side. Hill was known to patrol his turf at night with a gun on him, making sure enemies didn't get the upper hand. In the gang world, his name became synonymous with deadly efficiency. If you crossed paths with Big Snoop Dogg, you better be ready. But perhaps one of the most infamous moments of Hill's gang life came when he played a central role in the attempted assassination of Monster Kody. The first attempt came during the summer of 1980. The streets were already boiling with tension. One day, Kody's mom asked him to do something as simple as walk her to the store. But lurking nearby were members of the Rollin 60s, and it's believed Fred Hill was among them. They tried to catch Kody slipping. Accounts differ. Some say he spotted them just in time and made a run for it. Others say he was grazed but escaped. Either way, the message was clear. The 60s wanted Kody off the map, and this was only the beginning. Then came New Year's Eve, 1980, the night it almost ended for Kody. This time it was a well-planned ambush. A few girls who were friendly with 8 Trey members set Kody up, luring him to a secluded area with the promise of a casual hangout. But waiting in the shadows were 3 men from the Rollin 60s, and one of them was Fred Snoop Hill. They didn't hesitate. The moment Kody showed up, they sprang into action. Hill and his crew opened fire, shooting the 16-year-old 6 times, hitting him in the stomach, legs, and backside. It was a straight-up execution attempt.
Try to grab the gun, and he shoots me in the left hand, and my hand hits the wall like it's blown off, where I don't look at my hand. So now I know it's time to go. I turn around and try to run, he shoots me in the back. The bullet that hits me in the back knocks me down on my face.
Kody would later say that Hill shot me like I'd be shooting people, pointing to just how ruthless and cold the attack was. They left him there to die. But somehow Kody survived. He later credited the cheap night train wine he had been drinking for numbing the pain and slowing the bleeding, just enough for him to hold on until help arrived. He would need multiple surgeries and months to recover, but he lived. Fred Hill's name was already heavy in the streets before that ambush, but after, he became almost mythical. It was only a matter of time before Fred Big Snoop Dogg Hill's violent life caught up with him in the eyes of the law. By the mid-1980s, the LAPD and prosecutors were cracking down hard on the gang epidemic sweeping through LA. His reputation as a top Rollin 60s enforcer meant the police were always watching. Eventually, they caught up with him. Hill was arrested and charged with attempted murder and other serious crimes linked to the ongoing gang war. Now, the exact details of Hill's court cases remain murky, like many things in the gang world. There's a street code, and back then, snitching wasn't an option. That silence kept a lot of stories off the record, but what's known is that Hill was convicted and ended up doing hard time behind bars for attempted murder. And he wasn't the only one. Like Monster Kody once said, by the early 80s, very few of the heavy hitters from that era were living in any kind of peace. Most were either dead or locked up for years. Hill was no exception. Fred Hill spent most of the late 1980s in prison. Even on the inside, his reputation followed him. Gang historians and fellow inmates recall that Hill still commanded respect even behind the walls. His presence was felt, and his word still mattered. In a way, his incarceration created a temporary break in the brutal war between the 60s and the 8 Treys. With key figures like Hill and Kody off the streets, things quieted down, at least for a little while. By the time Hill got out, likely sometime in the 1990s, the street landscape had shifted, younger members had taken over, and a new generation of gangbangers was writing their own chapter. Hill was older now, in his 30s or 40s, and coming home after years in prison meant he had to adapt. But instead of jumping right back into the chaos, Hill made a surprising move. He pivoted. Having lived through one of the most dangerous eras in LA street history and seen it all firsthand, Fred Big Snoop Dog Hill decided to use his experience to do something different. He started speaking out. In the 2000s, he became involved in gang intervention work, trying to stop the same kind of violence he had once helped fuel. He worked with outreach programs, spoke to at-risk youth, and participated in community events. Hill used his story to paint a picture of what gang life really leads to: prison, pain, and death. And people listened. He was the kind of guy younger gangsters looked up to, or at least respected enough to hear out. Even some of his former rivals acknowledged that he was trying to do right by the streets now. Hill took part in peace summits, ceasefire talks, and internal meetings aimed at cooling down tensions between warring sets. During this time, the Rollin 60s themselves were going through leadership changes, with figures like Eugene Big U Henley stepping up. Hill's insights and experience were considered valuable, but as much as Hill had changed, the streets hadn't. On September 15, 2005, everything came crashing down again, this time not at the hands of a rival, but from someone within his own camp. It happened at a Rollin 60s gathering, one that was supposed to be peaceful. Everyone was asked to wear white t-shirts as a symbol of unity, but one younger member, a dude known as Little CJ, showed up in a black t-shirt, already sending a message of defiance. Tension sparked instantly between him and Hill. Words were exchanged. Some say Hill tried to check him. Others say CJ just wasn't trying to hear it from the old heads. Either way, it got heated. CJ stormed off, but he didn't just leave. A little while later, CJ came back with a gun in front of everyone. In what was supposed to be a moment of peace, CJ pulled the trigger. Fred Hill didn't have much time to react. He threw his hands up to protect his face. One bullet shattered his wrist, another grazed his head. In the chaos, people scattered. A woman named Nicole, who was nearby, later said she saw CJ running off right after the shots. And somehow, Hill survived. Again, the bullet to his head had just barely missed killing him. The shot to the wrist likely saved his life, deflecting the trajectory just enough. The attempted hit sent shockwaves through the 60s. If an OG like Hill wasn't safe from his own people, what did that say about the future of the gang? The incident also underscored internal strife within the 60s. After surviving that near-deadly shooting in 2005, Fred Big Snoop Dogg Hill made a move that shocked everyone who knew the rules of the streets. He talked to the police. While he was still recovering in the hospital, Hill picked up the phone and called LAPD Detective Martin. It was the same day he got shot. In that call, he did what no one ever expected from a certified OG like him. He named his shooter. According to Hill, it was Little CJ, the young Rollin 60s member he had gotten into that heated argument with earlier at the gang meetup. Hill gave details too, telling the detective how CJ broke the unity dress code by wearing black instead of white, how the argument escalated, and how it ended with CJ pulling a gun and firing at him. This was enough for the LAPD to build a strong case and issue an arrest warrant for CJ. Now, for whatever reason Hill did that, his decision to cooperate crossed a line, a big one. See, in the gang world, there's one golden rule: no snitching. Doesn't matter if it's your enemy, your friend, or someone who tried to take your life. Talking to the cops is seen as betrayal, and for a respected triple OG like Hill, someone who'd built his name in the streets and bled for his set, that decision came with serious consequences. At first, Hill stood by what he told the cops. He didn't back down, and for a minute, it looked like CJ was about to face the legal fallout. But the streets talk fast, and word got around even faster. And I didn't take long before the pressure became too much. Hill backed out. He recanted his statement and refused to testify. He stopped cooperating completely. Without his eyewitness testimony, the whole case against CJ fell apart. Some say CJ still ended up locked up by 2007 on unrelated charges and caught a 25-year sentence, but not for shooting Hill. But the damage was already done. Hill's moment of cooperation, even if it was short-lived, had already left a stain on his name. In the street world, you don't get second chances for snitching, even if you were the victim. Hill wasn't just criticized, he was disowned. One account even recalls a younger Rollin 60s member running into Hill in public and confronting him, calling him out for snitching. He reportedly laid hands on Hill right there in front of Hill's girlfriend and his own mother. Even the older generation started distancing themselves. The rules of the game were what they were, and Hill had broken one of the most sacred. Suddenly, he wasn't welcome at the same meetings and gatherings he once led. He was shut out. In the gang world, that kind of exile can be as dangerous as death. After that, Fred Hill slowly faded from the scene. His work as a community counselor came to a quiet end. Still, not everyone was quick to condemn. Some community activists quietly empathized with Hill. To them, the fact that he, of all people, felt the need to call the cops said everything about how crazy things had gotten. But that wasn't the loudest narrative. In the streets, his name was tainted, and Fred Hill knew it. After 2005, he kept a low profile. No flashy returns, no tell-all interviews, no memoirs, no documentaries. Unlike some gang legends who later found fame sharing their stories, Hill stayed quiet. Occasionally, his name pops up in documentaries or interviews about gang history. Now, in 2025, Fred Big Snoop Dogg Hill is somewhere around 66 or 67 years old. There's been no word of his passing, so he's believed to still be alive.